The 26th of January, Ukraine Media Center continues its operation. I'm Svetlana Cheparenko. We are talking about the perceptions and reviews of the Ukrainians on delivering e-services. Valeriia Tkach is Deputy Chief Executive of E-Services Development Minister of Digital Transformation. Volodymyr Brusilovskyi, the head of the team leader of the Action Support Project at the UNDP, and Mr. Hrushetskyi, the Deputy Director of Kyiv International Institute of Psychology. Let us begin, Ms. Tkach, with the general situation. The e-services, how are they viewed in Ukraine? Is it a must-have or something optional? How people are tracking the availability of e-services? Thank you for your question. The digitalization is not taking place not only in Ukraine, it's a world trend. 5 years ago, Ukraine perhaps was very actively engaging international partners and studying their experience. Now the situation has dramatically changed because our partners are asking us, how have you been successful in this? And this is because Ukraine has made a jump leap in digitalization at different stages. When talking about the fact that international partners take very much interest in what we are doing, our Estonian partners have launched a application that has been echoing the Ukrainian-developed DIA project. It's a pleasing fact that our partners participating that much actively. As for the e-services, beginning with the full-scale invasion, the Ministry for Digitalization has realized that this is a very important set of services for the older people. We have now about 20 million users, and more than that in the application DIA in general. The trend in general is that we see the development of the scope of the internet. Almost 50% of the Ukrainians are active users of the internet, including the e-services. According to the survey, we have noted that every third of the Ukrainians has taken advantage of at least 3 e-services over 3 years. This is very good. The DIA application includes different products, and we are in constant contact with our customers. What must be re-engineered, what must be advanced. And we are launching a service, then we analyze the feedback, and then we make it work better. Apart from the e-services, our main task is to develop the work of the public government-run registers. Without a stable work of the government-run registers, it is impossible to develop the optimized services, something that we set as a goal. We want to make sure that people are taking advantage. Apart from a couple of clicks, the team that is working on the application has been having this particular focus on our minds. Digitalization implies not only the central government offices, but of course it applies the local communities, including the CDTO process. This is very well documented in the survey. Let us talk about the DIA application. This seems to be an exemplar of the e-services. Sometimes people are amazed that you can listen to the radio, watch television, apart from taking advantage. How many users do you have? What are the most popular services, and how often do customers turn to your program? We've been working since 2021 with the help of the Ministry of Digitalization in the first place on the application DIA. The survey that we are discussing today has been in place for 4 years. We are focusing on the delivery of e-services and e-tools. Since the beginning of the full-scale war, we are focusing on the most vulnerable sectors of people, the single-parent family, the housing subsidies, and we have invested a lot of time to help our veterans. We think it is up to us to make sure that those who come from the front line, including those who have been wounded, are receiving the most comprehensive set of tools. I think it was a day or the day before yesterday, we crossed the number of 20 million active customers. Everybody in Ukraine know what the mobile application DIA is. It's a success story. But my point is something different. We'll be talking about the customer numbers and how the number is growing. As the UNDP program representative, I would like to state the following. Apart from the coverage of customers, we should not forget about the walks of life that are left behind. For example, people who have been wounded, physically impaired, older generation. We know we all have our parents. We all know about the older generation that are not that versatile in digital skills. They sometimes don't have the internet access. They don't have the access to the electronic services or have the possibility to deepen their digitalized skills. So we are targeting those particular categories of citizens. We want to focus on the digital accessibility. For example, visually impaired people must have an opportunity to take advantage of the digital services. There are mechanisms, there are tools, there are world standards to make sure how to implement this, not in 100 years' time. The government has approved the demands for such services to be accessed by the people with physical impairments, including the war veterans. The skills must also be worked on because older generation not always use these services and they don't have the access to the online services. You know, online services, not only government services, it's seeking for job and other opportunities. Our focus is to support the Ministry for Digitalization to broaden the base of the people who can deepen their digital skills and digital education through the DIA application in that particular sphere of education and the mechanism of teaching people and library access, including the digital accessibility to books. Part of the program will see the broadening over the 3 next years of these initiatives, building on the annual surveys. This will give us a comparative and other mechanisms to gauge the success number of people covered in these services. Let us talk about the survey itself. Will you, Mr. Hrushetskyi, tell us how satisfied Ukrainians are with the e-services delivery? Welcome, I am Anton. I'm the Deputy Director of Kyiv International Institute of Sociology. We've been running such a survey for a number of years. Over these 4 years, the methodology has been identical. We are covering 2,000 responders, people living in different regions of Ukraine, in bigger major cities or in villages, people with higher education and without one. We want to make sure that nobody is left behind, to make sure that we rectify all the mistakes. What is the basics of the e-services? Over the 2 decades, Ukraine has passed a level where almost zero level of internet access to almost 100% coverage of the Ukrainian public. 80% of the respondents replied that they use the internet at least 3 hours per day. Other categories include other sections. You know, in villages, you will be told that access to the internet is restricted, but 84% of our public are saying that they're using at least 2 hours on the line. The age is the discrimination line, as differentiates between the young people and the older generation. But it goes down, of course, when you talk about the people north of 70 years. This category of people seem to be lagging behind, but it's a good thing that 1/3 of those Ukrainians in general are using the internet, which tells us about the possibility to broaden the e-services. The older generation must be paid a special attention in these terms. This will, of course, be a complicated issue. The issue here runs as well. How many Ukrainians use the e-government services? 51% of the Ukrainians, which is to say every second adult, uses at least one government service. The number is identical to that of the last year, but the general statistics grows over the last 2 years. When you talk about the optional or must-have, it's not either or. People are demanding that such a service should be made available. People understand the advantages of e-services. However, the question remains the age distribution. Younger generation, of course, make up for the majority of them. When we talk about the older people, the number goes down at least 20 to 30 years of those using e-services. Although all the generation have their relatives and children and grandchildren who seem to be of help there. There is a positive trend of growth. There must be a couple of comments to be taken on board. 1/3 of those who are not using e-services, the question is, why don't they use? And the answer is that we don't need it, although when we ask further on, out of this list that might be available, do you think there is a good thing? Yes, people say that there is an item on the service list, and these services are there on the list. The thing is that people are not aware that such e-services are available, so public awareness is very important here. There are a lot of people who were saying that they're not digitally skilled, but we understand that, yes, people must be trained how to use these services. There is another issue, the infrastructural abilities of different Ukrainian localities. Of course, in the villages, the internet access is not that broad, but even there in the rural areas, the majority of people 57% of this use the e-government services. It's not about the development of country in general, but it tells us about how Ukraine gets into the European context. It's not a second world country or other specifics, Ukraine is doing a lot to make the lives of people better. We are focused on a simple people to make their lives better, and we're trying to overcome the difference between different categories of life. If you live in a village and you don't have the access to the internet, the more access you have to the e-services, the more empowered you feel. Another issue is as follows. I mentioned 50% last year using e-service. Now we see the number at the level of 60%. People sometimes don't know other services. They think that DIA goes beyond other than e-services. They have this brand perception of DIA service. There are 20 million customers of that service, and we've seen the dramatic increases compared to 2020. When you think about the pandemic time, we've seen the total improvement in this area. Does it relate to a number of people going abroad? It makes sense because the perception of DIA is different in different countries. Some time ago, DIA was viewed as something optional, and now people don't understand that since they have the DIA application on their smartphone, they are already users. But statistically speaking, we haven't seen any major changes. Now, my colleague will inform us about the further needs, what must be implemented, what must be engineered to make sure that more people use this particular application. In itself, it's a very good application, but the classical question, how do you make people use the government e-services? If you tell people that there is only one option, that you go through the government services through DIA. The other is how useful it is. Why is it that people prefer to go to specific centers for social services personally? But now we are trying to make sure that people realize how important and useful it is to do everything online. People understand the nature of our critical nature. We know there is also room for improvement. We should be taking those on board regarding our expertise, but the high level of satisfaction speaks for itself. People are using not because they don't have alternatives, but because once you have tried those e-services, you have been already persuaded how important and useful it is. Now that we ask people whether you would prefer electronic or filling out the papers physically, the number of people are saying that we are satisfied with the growth of reform, but when you ask what is good, to go to the service center, stand in queue, and wait for the time for your documents to be processed vis-a-vis the electronic services, people, of course, indicate that they would rather use e-services. There are a couple of innovations. Apart from general public, we have also asked the war veterans, because we pay special attention to those who have been serving at the front. They want to have a lot of good services. We've asked them about their experiences in using e-services. It's very important for us to see their perception, to look into their insights. And they have been very repetitive because they repeat the same thing. That advantage of the e-service is that it saves up your time and effort. You don't have to find yourself in a discomforting situation. The usefulness of the services, that goes without saying, and the lessening of the human factor. You know, sometimes we ask people, your name has been misspelled, the figures have been distorted. You realize that this can only be avoided through the e-services, and people agree with that. This is to say that we should be very mindful of that area. Another thing is barrier-free environment. We all know how good it is, but we should be aware what the barriers are. We need to have our inner information, and the other sources of information include the security of your personal data. When you think about the recent DDoS attacks, you think about the security of your personal data. You see, I should go to the next slide here. I show here the issue of security of personal data. We were asking people, what kind of criteria would you single out? The security of personal data and qualified signature. This is what the first-rate answer. We should understand that it's not a matter of informing people about the technical issues. It's about subjective perception that this information, your personal data, are secure. People must be aware that the cyber attacks not only target the infrastructure, it also targets the subversion of our trust in the government institutions, so that our life is complicated more and more. This is the aim of our enemy. The lack of the technical base is another issue. In the village, rural areas, as well as in the frontline cities, of course, the infrastructure is constantly shelled. And another issue is the improvement of the services. Some of those services are available online, then you have to submit other issues in paper form. This is a matter of feedback and taking on board all the mistakes we might have made so far. The other issue, and the last one, is the availability of the new services. 1/4 of the people asked were saying, including the veterans for that matter, that they have to realize the mechanics of the process. Traditionally, this is a project of self-education. Once you have failed, you have to turn to the well-qualified aides who will lead you through the process. If we were to ask the older generation, perhaps the question in terms of self-education would be lower. People of that category would turn to their children. But the question is, how do you teach those skills properly? When you are young, it is done very easily. But there are some age groups that must be taught, must be educated in all the areas of life, because the pace of life is going up. You need to take that on board, because these materials must be very short and concise. If you talk in different documents and in long documents, this will distract people's attention. People are open to these processes. There must be a matter of helping each other. It's not a development and crafting of the tools for their own sake. People must understand that this will make their life better. On an everyday basis, we are aware that you can pay for your public transportation pass electronically. The quality of life increases. The better the quality of life is, the country, of course, is closer to the state of the country of dreams. Today, Ukrainians are confident that in 10 years' time, this will be a flowering country. And, of course, this will bring us one step closer to that vision. What are the e-services that are not there in the catalog of e-service and people are asking for? Are there specific groups or specific services? There is not such a specific demand for a concrete e-service. The matter is very interesting and exciting. People have different expertise in that area. We are asking people whether you want to have some specific e-service available. It depends on your interest in life. And if you are a driver, you would likely say that there must be something done in terms of your driving permits. If you are an older people, perhaps healthcare, medicines will be in the focus of your attention. If you are a parent, you will be more zeroed in on the issues regarding your children. So another interpretation, which is an optimistic one, the services that must be implemented in the first place, where the majority of consensus has been achieved, everything else is additional, something that can be done, may be done for some specific categories of people. But at such a level, the e-service delivery and the number of such services, mainly we have covered all the needs, the basic needs, but the process seems to be endless. Times are changing, the needs are changing respectively. Is there anything we could add here? I would like to add, from the vantage point of UNDP, the demand for services is also predicated on some specific needs. Remember about the millions of displaced persons. People are asking, where do we get money for our new status? In Ukraine, we have implemented a number of e-services for the internally displaced persons. Perhaps this one of the priorities of ours. Currently, the urgency of the displaced persons have been going down, but what we are seeing increasing is the increasing demand for the digitalized registers of the military documents and your other documents of your being a participant of the hostilities. And perhaps there was something that we didn't prioritize before the war, the veteran issues, issues relating to the war documentation is now getting a new dimension. Educational services perhaps is also something that we understand are growing in demand. These services must be digitalized. The project under the name of DREAM, the Mria, is one of the focuses of ours. Traditional government e-services, I agree, a lot of things have been done and the popular services are there and the DEAR application, but there is a lot of there are a lot of things to be done viewing the full-scale invasion by the Russian Federation. The answers to these questions lie in the digital area. I agree with my colleagues. When we launched the application DEAR, not as a separate application, it has grown into an ecosystem. We began with the most popular services that people were waiting and expecting. Now, to be sure, these services have been digitalized, and we are now going into the areas that were not very much popular, or rather, they touch the interests of a restricted strata of people, for example, sailors. This is only part of the situation, but there are 220,000 of them, plus their family members. Altogether, it makes 1 million persons. And we have achieved quite a leap here. We are currently seeing that sailors are using these services, and the array of services is growing. You know, when you think about 20 million of the customers in general, it's not that much, but it increases the level of life of particular people. For example, sailors, they are not in Ukraine. They are in the high seas, but their family members are here in Ukraine. The development building, the housing sector, we began working on that about 5 to 6 years ago, but because these are exclusively complicated issue, a lot of registers, a lot of ministries are included in the process. You can't do that overnight. What we have seen now is that these services are automized. Now we began with the electronic requests to be filled out by people on their computers. with no engagement of other registers. Now, if you want to start building your house, if you have built something of a housing building, it will see the inclusion of all the electronic registers that are automated. So we've come through the stage where people are using the advantage of such services. Business, for example, different businesses are offering jobs. There are a lot of grants coming from our international partners. This year, we will continue to focus on this particular issue. Social sphere is something that we have mentioned. Subsidies, low-income families. We will be working to help them too. The Ministry of Digitalization, unfortunately, cannot work on its own. This is a teamwork, including other ministries and agencies. And we are happy that people turn to us with the ideas, let us pull this together. And of course, we are responsible. We will continue to cooperate with them. As for the survey that we have heard, that people are negative about their experience of using of e-services. When we see the assessment of e-services, where you see the negative assessment, it has to do with the fact that some people didn't receive any compensation. They didn't receive some money that they were expecting. It should be taken on board. Negative response does not necessarily mean people's negativity about the process per se. It's a negativity about the result of their requests. Now people are seeing the advantages, and we pay special attention to the feedback from the customers. Once we see that the process has gone awry, we want to analyze these cases, and where it is possible, we bring up the quality of delivery of such services. Digitalization of services, does it promote the trust of people to the government? Does it raise the trust to the government institutions and the services? I think it does bring up the level of trust. The survey indicates that the minimal cooperation, the physical interaction when people go to the services, they have some needs, people are liable to mistrusting the level of their documents being processed. Digitalization, of course, promotes the trust between ordinary people and the government. When people are applying digitally, they clearly understand what are the time limits, what are the expected results. Where do you go after you have received your results? Where to turn to if you are not satisfied? Digitalization, openness of this process promotes the trust to the government because people understand what the next stage is. You see, what we used to have in our practice, I need to build a house. You go to some official, and it depends on these officials. And this is where the distrust comes from. Perhaps people want me to pay some bribes or to bring other set of repetitive documents. Now, we are on a way to building up and promoting the trust between the citizens and the government. Dear journalists, do you have questions for our guests? Oleg Bonchuk. A couple of days ago, OpenAI announced that the main function of the Kyiv will be providing individual intellectual agent. Even today, GP4 has seen a device worth $199, which is called the killer of data. That is, we are into the era of big data. We are now training new generation of mental specialists, people that will be dealing with the new type of society. When a smartphone killer arrives, we will deal with the national security. Does DEAR have something in mind? Does it foresee such implications. We are keeping track of the times. We see what is going in the world. And we are trying to do as best as we can to import all those advantageous elements into the application, including the AI area. Of course, we will be engaging more and more digital tools. As for the security, the DIA application is quite a protected, a secure resource. From the vantage point of national security, I am in no position to comment here. Perhaps my colleagues will do that. As you will know, as far as the national security is concerned, I have nothing to say. You see, AI or machine learning and other modules are the technologies that look into the future, and their implementation into the e-government services will not be avoided. You remember the blockchain time. Of course, there are some restrictions. There must be some restriction to those processes and those types of hype. And the way these new technologies are used by the government is something that the humanity doesn't understand. This development is at the stage when the experts and other people try to understand what are the limits of these new technologies. We don't know where the limitations are. At some point in time in the future, we will know the limitations. As far as the national security is concerned, that's not my sphere of competence, but how to adapt the society to these technologies, I don't think there is anybody in the world who is in the know how to do that. But it is self-evident that such technologies will be used in DIA, included in both government and non-government digital solutions. Another question will be in English.
NatSec Media. Do you have need for volunteers from the Ukrainian community? And also, is there an opportunity for people who have been displaced to volunteer in order to help, for instance, the elders and people who want to learn how to use various parts of the new systems? Дякую.
Okay.
Indeed, as I have already indicated, the Ministry for Transformation in Digitalization, we have a platform called the Center for Digital Training, a network of 6,000 centers on the basis of local libraries in smaller villages and in major towns, where they provide an opportunity for everybody willing to receive skills in using the digital technologies. Local librarians will help you, and the non-governmental organization will also be of help there. The UNDP has been supportive, as we have always been. We are currently working with the NGOs that are volunteering in this area through the volunteers. Of course, we don't have enough resources to make it to implement it at the national level, but this year we will try to train at least 25,000 people who will help others to help digitally illiterate people, and 800 librarians who will be also of help there. So if there are people who see that they're engaged in the process and they are willing to cooperate either with our help, or you can turn to your local library to see where you can be helpful. The statistics tells us that if for a couple of years ago the major barrier to the digital services was the internet access, about a couple of years ago the ministry has paid enough money to get villages online. Now the problem isn't there. The problem now is the digital accessibility, especially with the people with disabilities, with the skills of people to be taking advantage of such services. So DIA and the United Nations Development Program will be working towards getting on board as many people as possible who want to be of help here. And another point as far as the training is concerned, apart from DIA education program, they have a lot of materials available online in the local social services centers. You can receive also help there because people there will teach you how to use the DIA application, how to get your electronic signature working. So whenever people come for services offline, our colleagues are training those people to make sure that as many people as possible go into the online services. If there are no more questions, my question will be as follows. The minister, Mr. Fedorov, has announced a number of available services, including marital status and other services. What is the news there? In a nutshell, the date of the launch of those programs has not been announced yet. You have to keep track of our announcements. All the launches will be announced. We are now working with those who test the program. One of the advantages of the DIA program is that we have been testing it before the service is launched. As for the new projects, the projects that you have mentioned, they are now being developed actively, and we are now getting prepared for the testing stage. These are very cool instruments, and of course, there will be some public awareness steps that you will know about them. Let me remind you that we've been talking about the survey of the public opinion and Ukrainians' views on the state electronic service. We will continue our services next week, and thank you for staying with us. Stay tuned.